The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of the Vienna Music Conservatory. Elena stood at the entrance, clutching her worn leather folder against her chest. Her heart hammered as she watched well-dressed musicians stream through the ornate doors, their expensive instrument cases gleaming in the light. She almost turned back. Who was she kidding? This wasn't her world anymore, but she'd come all this way. The train from her small town had taken 6 hours, and she'd saved for 3 months just to afford the ticket. She took a deep breath and walked inside. The conservatory's main hall took her breath away. Crystal chandeliers hung from painted ceilings, and the marble floors reflected everything like a mirror. Students clustered in groups, speaking in hushed, reverent tones about composers and techniques. Elena smoothed down her simple cotton dress, suddenly aware of how plain it looked compared to the elegant clothes around her. A poster near the entrance caught her eye. Master class with Viktor Petrov, open session. That's why she'd come. Viktor Petrov was one of the most famous pianists in Europe. She'd seen videos of his performances online, watched his fingers fly across the keys with almost superhuman speed. Part of her just wanted to see him play in person, to remember what that level of skill looked like up close. She followed the crowd into a magnificent concert hall. Rows of velvet seats faced a stage where a glossy black grand piano stood like a jewel under the spotlights. Elena chose a seat in the back row, not wanting to draw attention. Around her, students discussed their studies, dropping names of famous teachers in prestigious competitions. She stayed quiet, feeling invisible. Viktor Petrov swept onto the stage 15 minutes later. He was tall and lean, dressed in an expensive black suit that probably cost more than Elena made in 6 months. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and he carried himself with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no in his life. The room fell silent. "Welcome," Viktor said, his voice carrying effortlessly to the back of the hall. "Today we'll explore the boundary between technical precision and emotional expression, a topic most amateur musicians never truly grasp." He sat at the piano without another word and began to play. Elena leaned forward despite herself. His technique was flawless. Each note rang clear and perfect, his hands moving with mechanical precision through a complex Rachmaninoff piece. The students around her watched with wide eyes, some taking frantic notes, but something felt off to Elena. The notes were right, the timing impeccable, but it felt cold somehow, like watching a perfectly programmed computer, rather than a human sharing their soul. She pushed the thought away. Who was she to judge? For the next hour, Viktor demonstrated various pieces, pausing to lecture about technique and theory. He corrected students who volunteered to play, though corrected wasn't quite the right word. He tore them apart. Every small mistake was highlighted, every imperfect phrase dissected with cutting remarks that made the students shrink in their seats. "That's not music," he told one nervous young woman. "That's noise with good intentions." The girl fled the stage in tears. No one moved to comfort her. This was apparently normal here. During the break, Elena stayed in her seat while others mingled near the stage. She opened her folder and studied the sheet music she'd brought, running through the fingering in her mind. She probably shouldn't have brought it. Silly to think she might actually play. "Excuse me, everyone." The session moderator, an older woman with sharp eyes, stepped to the front. "We have a few minutes remaining. Does anyone else wish to play for Maestro Petrov's feedback?" The room went quiet. No one wanted to be the next victim. Elena's hand moved before her brain could stop it. It rose slowly, shakily into the air. All eyes turned to her. She felt her face flush hot. "Yes?" The moderator smiled. "Please come down." Elena stood on legs that felt like water. The walk down the aisle seemed to stretch forever. She could feel everyone watching, judging her simple clothes, her cheap shoes, her lack of polish. Viktor leaned against the piano, arms crossed, his expression already bored. He glanced at her worn folder and raised an eyebrow. "And you are?" he asked. "Elena Martinez. I teach piano, in a small town about 6 hours from here." Her voice came out smaller than she wanted. "A teacher?" Viktor exchanged a look with his assistant, a thin man standing near the stage. "And where did you study?" I'm mostly self-taught. I learned as a child, but I never attended a conservatory." A ripple of whispers spread through the audience. Someone snickered. Viktor's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Self-taught. How quaint." And you've come all this way to play for us. How brave. The word brave dripped with sarcasm. Elena's fingers tightened on her folder. Tell me, Victor continued, what piece have you prepared? Let me guess. Für Elise? Perhaps a simplified Moonlight Sonata. More laughter from the audience. Elena felt her cheeks burn. Actually, I was thinking of playing one of Chopin's nocturnes, the one in E-flat M-Tager, Opus 9, number 2, a nocturne. Victor pushed off from the piano and made a show of adjusting the bench height. Well, let's see what YouTube tutorials have taught you. Though I should warn you, that bench is set for serious musicians. Might be a bit high for bedroom playing. The audience laughed again, louder this time. Elena wanted to disappear, to run back up the aisle and out into the street. But she'd come this far. She'd spent her savings. She'd left her students for the day. She approached the piano. Victor stepped aside but didn't move far, positioning himself where he could watch her hands. Like he was expecting a disaster and didn't want to miss it. Whenever you're ready, he said, his tone suggesting she should make it quick. Elena sat down. The bench was too high for her, just as he'd said, but she didn't adjust it. Her hands trembled as she opened her folder and placed the sheet music on the stand. Victor noticed the trembling. Nervous hands make terrible music, he announced to the room. First rule of performance. A few students nodded sagely as if he'd shared profound wisdom. Elena stared at the keys. They blurred slightly as tears threatened to form. She blinked them back. No, she wouldn't cry. She wouldn't give him that satisfaction. She took a deep breath. Then another. The room felt too hot, too crowded, too judgmental. Her hands hovered over the keys, still shaking. Victor sighed dramatically. Perhaps this was ambitious. There's no shame in starting with simpler pieces. I could recommend some beginner books if you'd like. Something shifted inside Elena. A memory surfaced, sharp and clear. Her mother's voice from a lifetime ago. When they doubt you, let your music speak. Always let your music speak. Elena's hand steadied. She reached forward and quietly removed the sheet music from the stand, setting it aside on top of the piano. Victor frowned. You're going to play from memory? The nocturne? Elena didn't answer. Her fingers found their position on the keys. She closed her eyes and let the world fall away. The mocking voice, the judgmental crowd, the beautiful hall that wasn't meant for people like her. It all faded into silence. When her eyes opened again, they held something Victor Petrov hadn't expected to see. Certainty. Her fingers touched the keys, and the first notes rang out across the concert hall, but they weren't Chopin. The first notes that came from Elena's fingers weren't the gentle, flowing melody of Chopin's nocturne. They were sharp, precise, and impossibly fast, a cascade of sound that made several people in the audience sit up straight in their seats. Victor's expression shifted from bored amusement to confusion. His arms unfolded slightly. Elena's hands began to move across the keyboard with a speed that seemed almost violent. Her fingers struck keys at the far ends of the piano, leaping across octaves in movements so quick they blurred. This wasn't a simple romantic piece. This was something entirely different. Wait, someone whispered in the audience. Is that La Campanella? Another voice breathed. She's playing Liszt's La Campanella. A shocked silence settled over the room. Even the students who'd been smirking moments before now stared with open mouths. La Campanella was legendary among pianists. The Little Bell. One of the most technically demanding pieces ever written. Most professional pianists avoided it. The jumps were too risky, the speed too unforgiving, the precision required too extreme. Victor took a step back from the piano, his jaw tightening. His eyes locked onto Elena's hands. She played on, completely absorbed. Her right hand danced in the upper registers, creating those distinctive bell-like tones that gave the piece its name. Each note rang pure and crystalline, so clear you could hear them individually even at that impossible speed. Her left hand provided the foundation, moving in perfect coordination, never once interfering with the melodic line above. The piece was written to show off. Liszt had been a showman, and he'd created this composition specifically to make audiences gasp. It required not just technical skill but perfect muscle memory, absolute confidence and nerves of steel. One wrong move, one miscalculation in those enormous leaps, and the whole thing would collapse into chaos. Elena didn't miss a single note. Victor's face had gone pale. He stood frozen, watching her fingers fly across the keys. His earlier smugness had completely evaporated. Now he looked like someone who'd just realized they'd made a terrible mistake. The first major leap came. A jump of more than 2 octaves that had to land perfectly on a single note. Elena's hand lifted and flew across the keyboard. The note rang out exactly on pitch, exactly on time. A few people gasped. She made it look easy. The piece built in intensity. The bell-like melody grew faster, more insistent, climbing higher and higher up the keyboard. Elena's face remained calm, almost serene, but her body swayed slightly with the music. This wasn't just technical execution. She was feeling every note, living inside the sound. In the third row, an elderly man with white hair leaned toward the woman next to him. His hand gripped her arm urgently. "That's impossible," he whispered, his voice shaking. "No one plays like that unless they've been training since childhood. Professional training. World-class training." The woman pulled out her phone, her fingers moving frantically across the screen. She was searching for something, her eyes darting between the screen and Elena at the piano. Victor noticed the commotion but couldn't look away from Elena's performance. His hands had formed into fists at his sides. Whether from anger or shock, it was hard to tell. The piece entered its most dangerous section. A series of massive jumps combined with trills that required impossible dexterity. Pianists who attempted this passage often had to slow down to give themselves time to position their hands correctly. Elena didn't slow down. If anything, she played it faster than the standard tempo. Her right hand leaped across the keyboard like it was flying. Up, across, down, her fingers landing precisely where they needed to be every single time. The trills sparkled like actual bells ringing in a church tower. The audience had stopped breathing. One student, a young man in an expensive suit who'd laughed at Elena earlier, now sat with his hands covering his mouth. His eyes were wide with something that looked like fear. He'd studied piano for 15 years, practiced 8 hours a day, and he knew he could never play like this. Would never play like this no matter how long he trained. The woman with the phone suddenly gasped. She shoved her screen toward the elderly man beside her. He looked down and his face went completely white. "Dear God," he whispered. "It's her. It's actually her." He started to stand, but the woman pulled him back down. "Wait," she hissed. "Let her finish." Victor heard none of this. He was trapped in his own private nightmare, forced to watch as everything he'd said in the last 10 minutes turned to ash. This woman he'd mocked, this self-taught teacher from a small town, was playing circles around him. He'd performed La Campanella once in his career, at a competition 5 years ago. He'd made it through but had fumbled 2 of the major jumps. The judges had been kind in their reviews, calling it ambitious and technically impressive despite minor imperfections. There was nothing minor about what Elena was doing. This was perfection. The piece raced toward its conclusion. The final section required both hands to work in perfect synchronization, while executing jumps that seemed physically impossible. Elena's hands became a blur of motion. Her fingers struck the keys with absolute precision, creating a wall of sound that filled every corner of the concert hall. Then came the final cascade, a torrential downpour of notes that started at the top of the keyboard and tumbled down like water over rocks, gathering speed and power until it crashed into the final chord. Elena's hands came down on those last notes with complete authority. The sound rang out, powerful and clear, then slowly faded into silence. She lifted her hands from the keys. Her breathing was slightly faster, but otherwise she looked exactly as she had when she'd sat down, calm, composed, like she'd just finished playing a simple scale exercise, instead of one of the most difficult pieces in the entire piano repertoire. The silence stretched out. 1 second. 2 seconds, 3, nobody moved. Nobody seemed to remember how. Then from the back of the hall, a single person began to clap. Slowly at first, then faster. Within seconds, the entire room exploded into applause. People leaped to their feet, shouting. The young man who'd covered his mouth was now clapping so hard his palms had to hurt. Students who'd never met Elena had tears streaming down their faces. The elderly man in the third row was standing now, applauding with his hands raised high above his head. His face was wet with tears. "Brava," someone shouted. "Brava." The applause rolled on and on like thunder. Elena sat at the piano bench, her hands folded in her lap, looking slightly overwhelmed. She hadn't expected this. She'd just wanted to play, to remind herself that she still could. Victor stood motionless beside the piano. While everyone around him celebrated, he remained frozen. His face had gone from pale to flushed red. His hands hung at his sides, not clapping. He looked like a man watching his entire worldview crumble around him. The moderator rushed onto the stage, her face glowing with excitement. She reached for Elena's hand, trying to help her stand, to bring her forward for a proper bow. But before Elena could rise, Victor finally moved. He stepped toward the piano, and suddenly everyone remembered he was there. The applause began to die down, uncertain. What would the great Victor Petrov say now? He stood in front of Elena, looking down at her. His mouth opened, then closed. He seemed to be struggling with words that wouldn't come. Elena met his eyes steadily. She didn't look triumphant or proud, just patient, waiting. Finally, Victor spoke. His voice came out hoarse, barely above a whisper. "Who are you?" Elena looked up at Victor from the piano bench. His question hung in the air between them. "Who are you?" "I told you," she said quietly. "I'm Elena Martinez. I teach piano to children in—" "No." Victor's voice was stronger now, but it shook slightly. "No one plays like that without years of professional training. World-class training. That's not something you learn from books or videos." The elderly man from the third row was pushing his way toward the stage. People moved aside for him, recognizing his face. Professor Heinrich Aldrich, a legend in classical music circles. He'd taught at the Moscow Conservatory for 30 years before retiring to Vienna. "Victor," Professor Aldrich called out as he climbed the stage steps. His voice carried authority despite his age. "Step aside, please." Victor moved automatically, trained from his own student days to obey when a master teacher spoke. Professor Aldrich walked straight to Elena. His eyes were red, his hands trembling as he reached toward her. "Look at me, child," he said softly. "Look at me closely." Elena turned to face him fully. The professor studied her face for a long moment. Then his eyes dropped to her hands, still resting on her lap. He reached out and gently took her right hand, turning it over to examine her fingers. "These calluses," he whispered, "in exactly the same places. After all these years, they're still there." He looked back at her face, and a tear rolled down his weathered cheek. "Elena Volkov," he breathed. "You're Elena Volkov." A ripple of shock went through the crowd. That name meant nothing to the younger students, but the older musicians in the room recognized it. Whispers started spreading like wildfire. "Volkov, the child prodigy? I thought she died." "No, she disappeared. Just vanished from the competition circuit." Victor's face had gone white again. "That's impossible. Elena Volkov she was years ago. She'd be—" He trailed off, doing the math in his head, looking at Elena with new eyes. 28, Professor Aldrich said. "She'd be 28 now." "Which is exactly how old you are, isn't it, my dear?" Elena's composure finally cracked. Her eyes filled with tears as she looked at her old teacher. "Professor Aldrich, I didn't know you were here. I didn't know you'd left Moscow. 5 years ago." He still held her hand, gripping it like he was afraid she might disappear again. "I retired here. My wife wanted to be closer to her family." He smiled through his tears. "But you, where have you been? What happened to you? We looked everywhere. Your mother said you'd stopped playing, but we never understood why." The woman who'd been searching on her phone pushed forward. "I found it," she announced, holding up her screen. "Look, the Tchaikovsky competition 12 years ago. Junior division." She turned the phone so others could see. On the screen was a photo of a teenage girl standing next to a massive trophy, a gold medal around her neck. The girl's face was rounder, younger, but the eyes were unmistakable. It was Elena. "She won," the woman continued, scrolling through the article. "Beat everyone. The judges said she was the most naturally talented pianist they'd seen in 20 years. She was being compared to the greats. People said she'd be the next Argerich," Professor Aldrich finished quietly. "That's what we all said. The next Martha Argerich, maybe even better." He looked at Elena with infinite sadness. "What happened, child? Why did you leave?" Elena took a shaky breath. She'd kept this story inside for so long, 10 years of carrying it alone. "My parents," she said simply. "There was an accident. A car accident 2 months after that competition. They both—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Professor Aldrich closed his eyes. "Oh, Elena. I had 3 younger siblings," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. 12, 9, and 6 years old. There was no one else. My father's family was gone. My mother's parents were too old to manage. It was just me. The concert hall had gone completely silent. Everyone was straining to hear, so I came home. I took care of them. I got a job teaching piano in our town because it was the only thing I knew how to do. I could work from home, set my own hours, be there when they needed me. She smiled sadly. They're all grown now. The youngest just started university last month. That's why I could come here today. First time in 10 years I've been free to travel. Victor had sat down on the edge of the stage, his head in his hands. Several students were openly crying. You gave up everything, Professor Aldridge said. Your career, your future, everything you'd worked for. I gave up performing, Elena corrected gently. I never gave up music. I couldn't, it's part of me. She gestured to the piano. I still play every day. After my students leave, after my siblings went to bed, I'd play. For myself. Just for the joy of it. But the competitions, someone called from the audience. The concert tours, the recordings. You could have been one of the greatest pianists alive. Elena shook her head. Maybe. Or maybe I would have burned out like so many prodigies do. Maybe I would have learned to hate music because it became a job, a pressure, an expectation. She looked around at all the faces staring at her. I loved my siblings more than I loved performing. That was an easy choice. Victor finally looked up. His face was streaked with tears, which shocked everyone who knew him. Viktor Petrov didn't cry. He barely showed emotion at all. I remember you, he said hoarsely. The Tchaikovsky competition. I was there. Not competing, I was too old for the junior division by then. But I was in the audience. I was 19, still a student, and I watched you play. He laughed bitterly. You were 16 years old and you played better than I ever have in my entire career. He stood up slowly, walked to where Elena sat, and knelt down. Actually knelt, bringing himself below her eye level. I'm sorry, he said. I'm so sorry. What I said to you, how I treated you, it was... He struggled for words. There's no excuse. You came here after 10 years away from performing, nervous and brave, and I mocked you. I tried to humiliate you. You did humiliate me, Elena said, but her voice wasn't angry. Just honest, I know. Victor's voice broke. I do that. I've been doing it for years. To students, to other musicians, to anyone I think isn't good enough. And the truth is, I'm the one who's not good enough. I play technically well, but I don't have what you have. I never did. Professor Aldridge placed a hand on Victor's shoulder. Technical perfection without soul is just noise, Victor. I've been trying to teach you that for 3 years. Maybe now you'll listen. Victor nodded, not looking up. I had your poster, he told Elena. After that competition, you were famous in music schools everywhere. I had your poster on my practice room wall at the conservatory. I used to look at it and tell myself that one day I'd be that good. He laughed again, but it sounded painful. I spent 15 years trying to reach your level. And here you are, teaching children in a small town, playing for joy, and you're still so far beyond me it's not even close. Elena reached out and lifted his chin, making him look at her. You're a brilliant pianist, Victor. What you did today in the masterclass, the technique was flawless. But cold, he said. Mechanical. Like everyone always says. Because you're trying to prove something, Elena said gently. You're trying to show everyone how good you are instead of just sharing something beautiful. Music isn't about being better than everyone else. It's about connection. About touching something human in yourself and letting it flow through your fingers to touch something human in the people listening. She stood up from the piano bench, and Professor Aldridge helped her steady herself. Her legs were shaking now that the adrenaline was wearing off. I should go, she said. I have a long train ride home and I need to prepare lesson plans for Monday. Wait, Victor said, rising quickly to his feet. Please, would you... He hesitated, looking more vulnerable than anyone had ever seen him. Would you consider staying? Just for a few days? To teach a master class. The students here need to hear from someone who actually understands what music is supposed to be. Elena looked around at all the young faces watching her with hope and wonder. Then she looked back at Professor Aldridge, who nodded encouragingly. But before she could answer, her phone buzzed in her pocket. Elena pulled out her phone, glancing at the screen. A text message from her youngest sister, Natalia. Her heart jumped. Was something wrong? The message read, How did it go? Did you actually play? Tell me everything. Also, Mrs. Chen called. She wants to know if you can take on her daughter for lessons. Said she heard you were the best teacher in town. Elena smiled despite the chaos around her. Back home, life continued exactly as it had. Students needing lessons, neighbors recommending her, the simple routine she'd built over 10 years. That world felt very far away from this grand concert hall full of staring faces. She looked up at Victor, who was still waiting for her answer, his expression hopeful in a way that seemed strange on his usually arrogant face. "I can't," she said softly. "I have students who depend on me. 8 lessons scheduled for Monday alone. There's a recital next Saturday. 7 children performing for their parents for the first time. They're terrified and excited, and I need to be there to help them prepare." Victor's face fell, but he nodded. "Of course. I understand. I just thought, but..." Elena interrupted, "I could come back. Maybe in a month or 2. After the recital, things get quieter for a few weeks." Professor Aldridge beamed. "That would be wonderful. We could arrange something proper. Advertise it. Make it a real event." Elena shook her head quickly. "No advertisements, no press. Just a simple class like today. I'm not that person anymore. I don't want to be that person anymore." "You're sure?" the professor asked gently. "You could perform again, Elena, really perform. Concert halls would fight to book you. Recording contracts, international tours. It could all be yours again." Elena looked at the grand piano, running her hand along its polished surface. For a moment, something flickered across her face. Longing, maybe. Or memory. "I loved performing," she admitted. "When I was young, standing on stage felt like flying. The lights, the audience, the feeling of sharing music with hundreds of people at once, it was magical." She paused, her hand stilling on the piano. "But you know what else is magical? Watching a 7-year-old finally master a piece they've been struggling with for weeks. Seeing their face light up when their fingers find the right notes. Hearing a shy child who barely spoke in their first lesson, singing along to the music by their 10th. She smiled, and it reached her eyes in a way that made her look genuinely happy. "That's a different kind of magic. Quieter, maybe, but it's mine." A young woman in the front row raised her hand tentatively. She looked about 20 with nervous eyes and ink-stained fingers clutching a notebook. "Can I ask you something?" the girl said. Elena nodded. "Of course, don't you ever regret it? Giving up your career. You could have been famous. You could have been great. Doesn't that keep you up at night?" It was the question everyone wanted to ask but hadn't dared. The hall went quiet again, waiting for her answer. Elena thought for a moment before speaking. "When my parents died, my youngest sister was 6 years old. She cried every night for 3 months. The only thing that helped was when I sat at our old piano and played for her. She'd curl up on the bench next to me, holding onto my arm, and eventually, she'd fall asleep." She looked at the young woman directly. "My brother was 9. He got in fights at school because other kids teased him about being an orphan. He failed classes because he couldn't concentrate. But every day after school, he'd sit in the kitchen doing homework while I taught lessons. He said the music helped him focus. By the time he was 12, he was top of his class again." Elena's voice grew stronger. "My middle sister was 12 when it happened. She stopped eating, stopped talking to her friends, locked herself in her room. I was terrified I was losing her. Then one day she asked if I could teach her piano. She said if music meant that much to me, maybe it could help her too. We spent 2 years playing together, and slowly she came back to herself." She smiled at the memory. "So do I regret it? I gave up stages and applause and newspaper reviews. I gave up my name in programs and recording contracts. But I got to raise 3 incredible humans who are now out in the world doing good things. My youngest sister is studying to be a therapist. My brother is an engineer building sustainable housing. My middle sister teaches music to deaf children, using vibration and visual methods." Elena's eyes swept across the audience. "I shaped their lives and they shaped mine. That's not something I regret. That's something I'm proud of." Several people were crying openly now. Even Victor had to wipe his eyes again. The young woman who'd asked the question nodded slowly. "Thank you," she whispered. "I needed to hear that." Professor Aldridge cleared his throat, trying to regain some composure. "Before you go, Elena, would you consider playing one more piece? Something for the students to remember?" Elena hesitated. Her train left in 3 hours. She should probably go soon to make sure she didn't miss it. But looking at all these young faces, she felt something shift inside her chest. "All right," she said, "one more. But this time I'll play what I actually came here to play." She sat back down at the piano. Victor quickly adjusted the bench height for her properly this time, his movements careful and respectful. She gave him a grateful nod. Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, she announced. This was the first piece I ever performed publicly. I was 7 years old at a small concert in my hometown. My mother sat in the front row and my father recorded it on an old camera that barely worked. She placed her hands on the keys, and this time when she began to play, it was completely different from La Campanella. Where that had been fire and lightning, this was water and moonlight. The melody flowed like a gentle river, each note singing with pure emotion. This was the Elena from 12 years ago, the prodigy who had made judges cry. But it was also the Elena from today, the teacher who'd spent a decade learning that music wasn't about impressing people. It was about touching souls. The piece wasn't technically difficult compared to what she'd played before, but the way she played it with such tenderness and depth made it feel like the most important music in the world. She played it like a lullaby for her youngest sister, like a comfort for her grieving brother, like a bridge back to life for the sister who'd lost herself. Every note carried weight. Every phrase told a story. The audience didn't just hear the music. They felt it in their chests, in their throats, in the prickling behind their eyes. Victor stood transfixed. This was what he'd been missing his entire career. This connection, this vulnerability, this willingness to let the music break you open and show everyone what's inside. The nocturne built to its gentle climax, the melody soaring over rippling accompaniment, then slowly settled back down like a bird coming to rest. The final notes faded into silence so pure it felt sacred. No one moved. No one breathed. Then Professor Aldridge started clapping soft and slow. Others joined, but it wasn't the explosive applause from before. This was reverent, grateful, like they'd just witnessed something holy. Elena stood and picked up her worn folder. Thank you all for listening. And Victor, she turned to him. Keep playing, but play for the right reasons. Play because you love it, not because you need to prove anything. You have the skill. You just need to find the heart. Victor nodded, unable to speak. Elena walked toward the stage exit, Professor Aldridge accompanying her. As they reached the steps, a young man rushed forward, the same one who'd laughed at her earlier. Wait, please, he said breathlessly. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for laughing, and thank you. I've been studying piano for 15 years and I've never understood it until right now. Watching you play, I finally get what it's supposed to be about. Elena smiled warmly at him. Then today was worth it for both of us. As she descended the steps and walked up the aisle toward the exit, students parted to let her through. Some reached out to touch her hand as she passed. Others just watched with awe and newfound understanding. At the door, Elena paused and looked back one final time at the stage, at the piano gleaming under the lights, at the world she'd left behind. Then she stepped through the door and headed for the train station. Back to her small town, back to her students, back to her simple life, but Vienna would remember her. And more importantly, Victor would never forget. Elena's train pulled into her hometown station just after sunset. The small platform was empty except for old Mr. Kowalski closing up the ticket booth. He waved at her like he always did, and she waved back. Everything here was familiar, comfortable, unchanged. She walked the 15 minutes to her house, a small cottage at the end of a quiet street. The porch light was on. Through the window, she could see her middle sister, Irina, sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open. Irina was supposed to be at her own apartment across town, but she visited often. Elena unlocked the door and immediately Irina jumped up. Well? Her sister demanded. Natalia's been texting me nonstop. She said you were being mysterious. Did you actually go through with it? Did you play? Elena set down her bag and smiled. I played, and it felt good. Really good. Irina studied her face, then pulled her into a tight hug. I'm proud of you. That must have been scary. Terrifying, Elena admitted, but worth it. They sat at the kitchen table and Elena told her sister everything. Victor's mockery, the performance, the tears, the apologies, all of it. Irina listened with wide eyes, occasionally gasping or laughing. I wish I could have seen his face, Irina said when Elena described Victor's reaction. After everything you gave up to take care of us, you deserve moments like that. I didn't give up anything, Elena said firmly. I chose you three. That's different. Still. Irina reached across the table and squeezed her hand. We never really thanked you properly. You were only 18, Elena. You should have been at university living your own life, becoming famous. Instead, you changed diapers and made school lunches and sat through parent-teacher conferences. And I'd do it again, Elena said, without hesitation. The front door burst open and Natalia rushed in, still in her university sweatshirt, her backpack bouncing on her shoulder. At 19, she was studying psychology and somehow managing to be at the top of her class while also joining every club on campus. You're home. Natalia threw her arms around Elena from behind. Tell me everything. Was the conservatory amazing? Did people freak out when you played? I bet they freaked out, Elena laughed. They were surprised, yes, surprised. That's it? Come on, give me details. So Elena told the story again, and Natalia hung on every word, her eyes shining with excitement and pride. When Elena mentioned Victor kneeling to apologize, Natalia actually cheered. Good. He deserved to feel terrible. You're incredible, and he should have known better than to judge you. Their brother Daniel called while they were still talking. He was working late at his engineering firm, but he'd gotten Natalia's messages and wanted to hear what happened. Elena put him on speakerphone and summarized the story once more. That's my sister, Daniel said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. Making arrogant pianists cry since 2025, they all laughed. After they hung up, the three of them sat together in the kitchen, drinking tea and talking about nothing important. Natalia's upcoming exams, Irina's new teaching methods, the neighbor's cat that kept sneaking into their yard. This was Elena's life. Not glamorous, not famous, but full of the people she loved most. The next morning, Elena woke early to prepare for her Monday lessons. Her first student, a shy 8-year-old named Lily, arrived at 9. Lily was struggling with a simple Mozart piece, getting frustrated every time her fingers stumbled over the notes. I can't do it, Lily said, her eyes filling with tears. It's too hard. I'm not good enough. Elena pulled up a chair next to the piano bench. Can I tell you a secret? Yesterday I played in front of a huge audience. Very fancy people at a very fancy conservatory. And before I played, I was so nervous I thought I might throw up. Lily's eyes went wide. Really? But you're so good. Being good doesn't mean you're never scared, Elena said gently. It means you play anyway. And you know what? Mistakes don't matter as much as you think. What matters is that you keep trying, that you love the music, and that you don't give up on yourself. She guided Lily's hands back to the keys. Now let's take it slow, just 4 measures at a time. We'll build it piece by piece until it feels natural. They worked together for 30 minutes. By the end, Lily was playing the passage that had frustrated her. Not perfectly, but with growing confidence. When she finished, she looked up at Elena with the biggest smile. I did it. You did, Elena said. I'm so proud of you. After Lily left, Elena had 6 more students throughout the day. Each one got her full attention, her patience, her encouragement. By evening, she was tired but satisfied. She was heating up dinner when her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Hello? Elena? It's Professor Aldridge. I hope you don't mind. I got your number from the conservatory's sign-in sheet. Professor? No, I don't mind. Is everything all right? More than all right, he said, and she could hear the excitement in his voice. I wanted you to know what happened after you left yesterday. Victor canceled the rest of his masterclass tour. Just canceled it, all 6 cities. His management is furious. Elena's heart sank. Oh no. Did I? No, nothing like that. The professor interrupted quickly. He told them he needs to relearn how to play. His words exactly. He's staying in Vienna to study. Really study, not just perform. He asked if I would teach him, help him find the emotional connection he's been missing. Elena felt relief wash over her. That's wonderful. It is. And that's not all. Do you remember that young woman who asked if you regretted your choices? Her name is Teresa. She came to my office this morning. She's been studying piano for 12 years, pushing herself to be technically perfect, practicing until her hands ache. She said watching you made her realize she'd forgotten why she started playing in the first place. Professor Aldridge paused. She's changing her approach. Several students are, actually. They're talking about music differently now, not about winning competitions or impressing judges, but about what the music means to them. You changed something in that room yesterday, Elena. You reminded us all what this is supposed to be about. Elena didn't know what to say. She just wanted to play again, to prove to herself she still could. She hadn't expected to impact anyone else. There's one more thing. The professor continued. Victor wants to visit your town. He wants to watch you teach, to understand how you connect with students. Would that be all right? Elena thought about Victor kneeling on the stage, tears in his eyes, his arrogance completely stripped away. She thought about second chances and the courage it takes to admit you've been wrong. Yes, she said. He can come, but he has to be willing to sit quietly in the corner. My students come first. Professor Aldridge chuckled. I'll make sure he understands. Thank you, Elena. For everything. After they hung up, Elena stood in her small kitchen looking at the walls covered with crayon drawings her students had made for her. Stick figures at pianos, lopsided hearts, messages in childish handwriting. You're the best teacher ever. Thank you for helping me. Music is fun because of you. She thought about the conservatory with its crystal chandeliers and marble floors. She thought about the life she could have had. Concert halls, standing ovations, her name in lights. Then she thought about Lily's smile this morning when she finally played that Mozart piece. She thought about her siblings, grown and happy and thriving. She thought about every student she'd taught over the past 10 years, carrying her love of music out into the world in their own small ways. No regrets. Not a single one. Her phone buzzed again. A message from Victor's number. Apparently the professor had shared it. Thank you for showing me what I'd lost. I hope I can learn to play the way you do, with heart instead of ego. If you'll let me, I'd like to start over, not as Victor Petrov, the famous pianist, but as a student who has everything to learn. Elena smiled and typed back, Everyone deserves a second chance. Come visit whenever you're ready. Bring comfortable shoes. My students like to run around between lessons. She set down her phone and walked to her own piano, the one she'd played for her sister's bedtime, for her brother's homework time, for her own late-night sessions when the house was quiet. It wasn't a grand concert piano. It was old, slightly out of tune, with keys that stuck sometimes, but it was hers. And when she played it, she played for all the right reasons. Elena sat down and began to play, not for an audience or a competition or to prove anything to anyone. She played because the music was inside her and needed to come out. She played because it made her happy. She played because this was home, and in that small house, on that worn piano, in a town that would never make headlines, Elena created something more valuable than fame. She created joy. The music drifted through the open window into the evening air, reaching neighbors who paused to listen, reaching passing strangers who smiled without knowing why, reaching up into the darkening sky like a prayer of gratitude. And somewhere in Vienna, Victor listened to a recording someone had made of Elena's performance, playing it over and over, finally beginning to understand what music was meant to be. Not a competition, not a performance, not a way to prove superiority, just beauty, shared freely from one human heart to another. That was Elena's true gift. And she gave it every single day, one student at a time, one note at a time, one moment of connection at a time. The world might never know her name again, but the people whose lives she touched would never forget it.